The Memphis Grizzlies are trading away Desmond Bane, and in return, they're getting Kentavious Caldwell Pope, Cole Anthony, 4 first round picks from the Magic, as well as a first round pick swap. And this trade would be pretty big on its own. Desmond Bane is an all star caliber guard, but especially when you take this trade into consideration with the likes of the Mikal Bridges trade and the Rudy Gobert trade, we're really seeing inflation in the trade market, particularly for these guys who aren't stars necessarily. They're good players, but you're getting a lot of assets moved in the process. And there are some potential causes for this, as well as some potential aftermath, a little bit of a fallout from this inflation. First of all, why is this happening? You look back at last year with the Mikal Bridges trade, the Knicks sent out 5 first round picks. This one, 4 first round picks. And I think we're seeing a little bit of a devaluation of the first round pick. And there are two primary reasons that come to mind when I think of this. First of all, is with the advent of social media, some draft classes they're going to get a lot of publicity. You think of Wimby, you think of Cooper Flag, these prospects that seem like can't miss. But then in contrast, when you don't have someone like that, that is an absolute superstar at the top of the draft, like in this past year, it feels more so like a more forgettable draft class and one you don't necessarily need a first round pick. Maybe there's a lot of depth to the draft instead, and there's not going to be that big a difference between having the first pick and a late lottery pick, for example. In terms of your positioning within the draft. And obviously, in some draft classes, that's different. But just kind of having that contrast year by year of if this one has that publicity to it, if there's this very low regarded prospect, when we have guys like Wimby, when we have guys like Cooper Flag, when all of a sudden you get a draft class that doesn't have that same level of prospect, it feels less desirable, and you're more willing to move on from that pick. And then secondly, I think we're seeing a rise in the valuation of the second round. Desmond Bane himself was the 30th overall pick, I believe. And then you've got guys like Jokic, who has gone on to be a generational talent, who redefined the center position. He was a second round pick. Draymond Green, Dylan Brooks, Malcolm Brogdon. It seems like we're getting more and more talent coming out of that second round. And with that, that kind of coincides with the first point, in which when you have this kind of depth in draft classes now where everybody seems so talented, all of a sudden that first round pick holds less value because the second round pick holds a little bit more, and the contrast isn't as big. And with that, I think that's why you see teams more willing to move on from these first round picks. And in terms of the trade market itself, what that means for a move for the likes of a Desmond Bane or for a Mikal Bridges is when teams go out here and they send out an offer for the likes of Bane, they feel as though they are picking up a piece that is going to kind of complete their team. You think of the Magic right now. Their core, of course, their core duo is Franz Wagner and Paul Banchero. And beyond that, they have a loaded backcourt already. They've got guys like Anthony Black, Jalen Suggs, and they keep seemingly adding to it. And so with that, you're able to move on from the likes of KCP and Cole Anthony because you feel like Bane is kind of that missing piece that you need in that backcourt to really take it to the next level, and you don't want to give up a lot of valuable assets. So instead, what you do is you get rid of these first round picks. But ultimately, these first round picks, they could turn out to be something very, very good. You think of the Clippers move for Paul George many years ago, in which that was a trade where it seemed like at the time it made sense. Paul George just had an MVP level season for the OKC Thunder, and in return, the Thunder were getting SGA and a lot of picks. And at the time, the Clippers didn't know what the value of Shea was going to be. But when you've got a young player like that, you can't really project, especially for a team that is great at developing. And so with that, Shea, of course, went on to become an MVP as well as a potential NBA champion now. So overall, sometimes it's kind of a coin toss what these first round picks are going to turn out to be. And so with that though, they're willing to move on, especially with feeling like they can get more in the later stages of the draft. They're willing to move on, part ways with these first round picks because of the level of talent in the league now, of the parity, and they trust in their development team. And overall, you're seeing that devaluation of the first round pick, and that's how you get trades like this, in which they move on from 4 of them. For the implications for the Memphis Grizzlies, this is a team that just a couple years ago, they were the 2 seed in, I believe, back-to-back years in the Western Conference. And it's been a little bit of a fall from grace for them. Now, there have been moments where it's been injuries. There, of course, has also been the John Morant situation off the court. However, this is a team that has the talent to be very, very good in the West. With a move like this, I'm not certain where you're going moving forward, because Bane was a big, big part of your team. and you've still got Jaw, you've still got Jaren Jackson Jr. But it does feel to me like you would want to keep Bane. However, with this many kinds of first round picks, you've got a lot of talent on this roster. You've got a lot of depth to it. The likes of Vince Williams, Gigi Jackson, a lot of young talent that you can develop. I think that's what they're planning here, especially with KCP as a veteran. He could come in and mentor. Then for the Orlando Magic, I like this move a lot for them. This is a team that has lacked spacing for a while now, and in the modern NBA, you have to be able to space the floor. If you don't, teams are going to be able to game plan against you very, very well and attack your weaknesses and force you to shoot. And you don't want that, especially with the way that this roster looks, led by Paulo, led by Franz, led by Jalen Suggs, and adding Desmond Bane. Bane can be a lights out shooter. That's a big move for Orlando. I really, really like it. And moving on from all these first round picks, obviously that is a big, big move. However, you also have a lot of young talent on this roster, so it's not like you're just entirely sacrificing that. And overall, what does this kind of trade market mean for the future of the league, for the future kinds of trades that we can see? Well, whenever a market like this goes up, eventually it's going to have to come down. And I think you kind of see that in the moves for bigger stars like the Luka Doncic trade. There was only one first round pick that got moved in that one. And so it kind of does become the value of it because the Lakers, they had to trade away the likes of Anthony Davis and Max Christie to get Luka Doncic, but also only one first round pick. So I think the Lakers were a team that recognized that they wanted to be able to maintain as many first round picks as possible, especially in a current timeline in which LeBron's not going to be there for a long time at this stage in his career. And Luka Doncic is the future, and you want to build around that. You want to keep your first round picks. And I think that could kind of set a precedent moving forward because now we're seeing all these first round picks get moved left and right. Eventually, that's going to come back to bite some teams. Even with Mikal Bridges, there were moments where he was pulling out some heroics for the Knicks, but there were other moments in which there were some reactions to some plays that he made or the performances that he was having, and they were asking, we traded away 5 first round picks for this guy. And so I think ultimately that allows for kind of a reflection of these picks and determining if moving on is really worth it, especially when you're not getting a superstar. Instead, you're getting Desmond Bane. And that's not a knock on Bane, but these 4 first round picks, the sum of all of those eventually could turn out to be more than Bane. Ultimately, it just kind of comes down to the situation for the Orlando Magic. They felt as though Desmond Bane was kind of the missing piece for them, so they were willing to move on. I think ultimately, though, as we see more and more first round picks get moved, we're also going to see big trades that don't necessarily pay off. You think of the Minnesota Timberwolves and their trade for Gobert. That first year, they didn't improve much at all. And it took a pretty big adjustment for it to truly work out. Blockbuster trades where you've got big moves, you got a lot of assets going around, that can lead to a major adjustment period, and you've got to be able to kind of project that, check the forecast for that. And I think when you see all of these, especially if a trade goes awry, we're going to see a lot of teams be more conscious because the market is huge right now. The market for first round picks is as high as it's ever going to be. Their value is as low as it's ever going to be. The trade market inflation is super, super high. Eventually, that's come back down. And the way that it comes back down is if a trade doesn't pan out. If a trade feels as though a team definitively lost it. And of course, there's one guy that is going to be on the market this offseason. He's the talk of the town. That is Kevin Durant. He's going to be out of Phoenix. And I'm really curious to see what the trade is going to be for him. Because on one hand, you've got these moves like the Mikal Bridges, like the Desmond Bane, in which these guys are getting a lot of assets thrown at them. But then you've also got the Luka Doncic one, which is obviously a much more comparable star to KD. And that's someone who only got one first round pick moved in that trade. But you look at the teams that are in the market for him, like Houston, like Miami, like San Antonio, like Minnesota. They don't have a lot to offer in terms of stars that they're willing to move on from. The Timberwolves, they don't want to move on from Jaden McDaniels. Obviously, they're not moving away from Anthony Edwards. They would never think of doing such a thing for San Antonio. They're obviously keeping Wemby. They probably want to keep De'Aaron Fox and a lot of that core for Houston Rockets. KD feels like a complete piece of the puzzle, but you're probably gonna have to move on from first round picks for him because you don't want to move away from what you've got building in Houston right now with that roster. And I think that's another big part to trade market inflation. Why we're seeing all these first round picks get moved is because teams are recognizing that if they move on from a lot of players, that can really hurt their team because it might feel like this guy is a missing piece. But if you move on from 3 different players that were all contributors for you, all of a sudden, now you've got more gaps in the roster. So you're seeing these first round picks get moved more and more so because that feels more safe because you don't know what those first round picks are going to turn into. And instead, you are able to kind of not feel as though you lost as much because you didn't lose actual members of your roster yet. You just lost potential members in the future. And I think all these factors combined, we're seeing a huge level of trademark inflation. I'm very interested to see how that works out with the Kevin Durant situation. And overall, this is a big trade for the Memphis Grizzlies. I got a text saying originally that Memphis kind of fleeced Orlando. And at the moment, I just saw Cole Anthony. I saw KCP. I was like, hey, I think this was a pretty good trade in terms of what Orlando had to give up and what they got in return. But then I saw those 4 first round picks, and I think that's just super, super interesting to see how the trade market has changed and how we're seeing all these first round picks getting moved. What are the reasons for it and what it means for the future with a guy like Kevin Durant? But currently, and as we've seen with this Desmond Bane move, we are seeing a big, big change in the NBA in terms of how we're seeing trades in the value of first round picks, and we're seeing a major, major level of trade market inflation.